A reading from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 14, verses 25 through 33. Listen for a good word from the Lord. Now large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." The Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. My family, my wife, my daughter, and my son are at the beach this weekend, as are many families who take advantage of the long Labor Day weekend and the unofficial end of summer. They're actually at the beach with my family. They're at a house on Hilton Head Island with my parents, my brother and sister, and their spouses, and my nieces and nephews. Now, having just gotten back from sabbatical, I didn't need to be away from the church for another Sunday, so I'm not with them. Instead, I have the house to myself, which has its own perks. But this past Friday at around noon, my wife packed up the car, picked the kids up from school, and drove for hours to spend the weekend with my family without me so that her children could spend the weekend with their grandparents and cousins. Now that's a mother's love, if you ask me. Now, the whole trip was initiated by my parents. They love to get all of the kids and grandkids together whenever possible, and they have a connection to the house where they stay each year. Now, what our daughter loves most about this particular beach house is the fact that it has its own pool. She thinks that's the coolest thing ever. In fact, the pool is her favorite part of just about any trip she goes on. You ask her what her favorite part of a beach trip was. She won't say the beach or the ocean. She'll say the pool. You ask her what she loved most about staying with her grandparents and her cousins. It's the pool. We went to Disney World this past February, and if you ask her what her favorite part of the most magical place on earth was, and she will say, the pool. She's a girl who loves the water. And to not have to share it with anyone but her family, well, that's incredible to her. She's getting braver around the water, too. She started swimming on her own. She's gone off into the deep end. She loves to jump and dive into the water. And as her father, there is part of me that loves this. I love to watch her grow as she gets stronger and braver. There's also part of me that's completely terrified. You have to teach your kids about diving into the water, don't you? You have to show them how to do it properly to protect their heads. And you have to teach them that they need all of the information they can get before they actually ever jump into the water. Never dive into the water unless you know how deep it is, we try to teach her. Never dive into the water unless you have some sense of what is underneath the surface. That's especially true when you're out on a boat in the lake and you can't see what's underneath the surface of the water. Never dive into the water unless you have a safe exit strategy. In the pool, that means you need to know where the edge and the ladder or the steps are at all times so you can grab on and pull yourself out if you get tired. If you are jumping into the lake, always put on a life jacket first, and always, always, always make sure that there is an adult present who knows that you are about to jump into the water. In other words, before you dive into the water, make sure you have all the information that you need and you're fully prepared for the entire experience to go well and you can handle it. Make sure you have taken everything into consideration because it can be dangerous and you can literally get in over your head. Never jump into the water until you have really thought about the risk, even the cost. I thought about those lessons we're trying to teach our daughter when I was meditating on this passage this week. If you remember the passage from last week, Jesus was dining at the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees, and he was urging everyone to choose a different way of living than the rest of the world. The world plays a messed up and fickle game of honor and shame. It steps on and over people if they can't provide you with something that will help you get ahead in this world. But that isn't the way of God. God sees value and worth in all people. So live out the values of God, Jesus says. Live out the way of God's kingdom here and now. A kingdom where those who exalt themselves are humbled, and those who humble themselves are exalted. And where the oppressed, the outcast, and the marginalized are welcomed and served. So welcome all people to your table, especially those that everyone else has rejected. Well, as Jesus moved on from that house, the crowds followed after him, as was almost always the case. And at some point, it's as if he was traveling and he stopped to look at them and ask, just where do you think you're going? If you're going to follow me, you had better think long and hard about it. You had better have all the information you need before jumping into these waters, because we are jumping into the deep end of murky and choppy waters of life, and it isn't going to be an easy swim. You could drown if you don't know how to swim like I swim, he would say. This life that Jesus wants us to live, following him and living his way, playing by different rules than those that the rest of the world plays by, will cost you something. It may very well cost you everything, and you had better be prepared to make the necessary sacrifices. He says you basically have to hate everything else that this world has to offer. Jesus says you have to hate your mother and your father, your spouse and your children, your sister and your brother. You have to hate your entire family. You really have to hate your own life and be willing to lay it down if you have to. And all the stuff that you've accumulated in life, your possessions, your home, everything that brings you comfort and security, well, you have to hate that too. Leave that behind if you want to follow Jesus. If you aren't ready to do that, then you aren't prepared. Jesus says that makes us like someone who goes into a construction project but has no idea how you're going to be able to afford all of the materials you need, or how you're going to pay off the debt when the project is completed. Or it makes you like you're going to be a king who sends troops off to war, but they don't have the proper equipment. They don't have the uniforms, the body armor, the supplies, the weapons that they need to win. They're doomed before they ever start. Don't be like that, he says. Think about it long and hard, and make sure you are prepared to make the sacrifices necessary to go where this journey is leading. Now, I don't know about you, but this makes me uncomfortable. This is a hard word, a challenging lesson from Jesus. And I'll be real honest and say that I don't like it when Jesus uses the word hate here. Hate is one of those words we teach our children not to use. Actually, we didn't even have to teach our children not to use that word. The preschool teachers take care of that for us. Now, I don't remember the first time it happened, because I believe it happened a few times. But when our daughter was in preschool, my wife and I would find ourselves accidentally using that word, hate, in a conversation. Usually we would be sharing something challenging that had happened to someone that we knew. Someone would be given a diagnosis that changed their world. A job was lost. Someone had family troubles. They got into a wreck. And whichever one of us was listening to the other share this story of woe would often respond, "Well, that's too bad. I hate that." To which our daughter, who is constantly reminding us now that she has great hearing and listens to everything, she would jump in and say, "We don't say that, Daddy. That's a bad word. Hate is a bad word. We don't say that." You can't tell a child, "Well, honey, in this as in all things, context is king." I mean, they don't get that. That just doesn't compute. But she's right, isn't she? Hate is a bad word. We shouldn't like using it. We aren't supposed to use it. We use it way too often to simply say that we don't like something, or that we wish something hadn't happened to someone that we know and love. Or we reserve it for those times when we're holding a grudge against someone who has wronged us. This time of year, we think about that rival football team and their fan base and how we hate them, even though we don't know anything else about them. Hate is a word associated with people who are prejudiced and violent against people who aren't like them. We shouldn't like the word hate. We shouldn't use it. And we should work to not feel it. And isn't Jesus the one who told us that we shouldn't hate, but that we should love? Isn't Jesus the one who said that we shouldn't hate our enemies and those who harm us and persecute us and want to do wrong to us, but that we should love them? And isn't it Jesus who said that if we hate our brother and sister and hold a grudge against them, then it does the same thing to our heart and soul as it would if we actually killed them? And now here is Jesus telling the crowds that if they don't hate their families and their lives and their possessions, they can't truly follow him. What are we supposed to make of that? Well, it may not make sense to our 21st century sensibilities, but Jesus understood a long-standing wisdom tradition that would often hold two things against each other, lifting one up while putting the other down. That tradition would use aphorisms like this to help people discern which was the better and more virtuous option by saying you should love this and hate that. In the Psalms and Proverbs, there are many occasions where those who are said to be wicked hate discipline, justice, and knowledge, and love what is evil, while the righteous hate wickedness, falsehood, and gossip, but love God and God's ways. It's right in line with what Jesus said about the fact that we can't serve two masters. We'll end up loving one and hating the other. We'll be devoted to one and we'll despise the other. So he said we can't serve both God and money. So in a faith where hate, true hate as we understand it today, has no true place, it's intentional hyperbole used to make a point. And the point is this: faith in Jesus and following his way must be the first and most important thing in your life. It must be the top priority. It must shape everything else. Nothing and no one can come before it. You have to be prepared to give up everything else because God requires all of you. Nothing and no one can hold you back from following Jesus. I use an app called Lectio 365 most mornings as part of my morning spiritual routine. And often, as the guide for that morning leads you into prayer, she or he will pray a prayer that likely sounds familiar to many of us. And it goes like this: Jesus, I fix my eyes on you, the author and perfecter of my story. Help me to know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly each and every day. That's what's at the heart of journeying with Jesus: getting to know Jesus more clearly, loving him more dearly, and following him more nearly each day. And anything that prevents that, anything that stands in the way, is something that will need to be left behind. If you're going to truly be a disciple, a follower of Jesus, then at some point you will find yourself in the uncomfortable position of having to choose between Jesus and something or someone else. You may be in a relationship with someone, but something about that relationship will not allow you to be fully who God has called you to be. It may be toxic or abusive or parasitic, or maybe leading you down a path that your gut tells you isn't good for you. It isn't leading you toward abundant life. And you will find yourself at a point where you have to decide if you are going to maintain that relationship or follow Jesus. It could be a relationship with a friend or a coworker. It could be with a parent. It could even be with a spouse. It could be with someone that you truly and deeply love with so much of your heart. And you have to do the difficult work of discerning if this relationship is allowing you to follow Jesus or not. And if it isn't, then you may have to end it. You may have to actually walk away. And the same thing could be said for our attachments to things and even places. Comfort and stability are not bad things. They are things toward which we naturally gravitate. At the same time, walking with and listening to the Spirit of Jesus may pull on your heart and tell you that you need to do something that will require you to leave all of that stuff behind. It may require you to get rid of all of that extra stuff that you don't need. Maybe because your identity has become about accumulation and about having the latest and greatest that the market has to offer. It could be that squirreling it all away for a rainy day makes you feel so secure that you'd feel like you don't have to depend on anyone, including God. Or purchasing things without considering how they are made and their impacts on God's creation, or perhaps the oppression of people groups, it may draw you into perpetuating a broken system. Or you may be tempted to just keep the job with the company that you know operates with policies that aren't in line with the ethics of your faith because you don't want to give up the paycheck and the benefits. They're too good, it seems. And suddenly, whatever it is that you can't give up, it's become your idol. Do you remember the story of the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and asked him what he needed to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus told him that he needed to follow the commandments. When the young ruler said that he had always followed them, even when he was a little boy, Jesus was able to look into his heart and see that the one thing that was holding him back was all of his possessions. His possessions had become his idol. They had become more important than following the will of God. So Jesus told him to leave that all behind. Go and sell everything and give it to the poor, Jesus said, and then come and follow me. Free yourself. Walk away and walk with Jesus. If there is something or someone that is holding you back from your fully committing your life to Jesus, if there is something or someone that you put ahead of your commitment to Jesus, you better be prepared to walk away from it. Otherwise, you'll never make it to the end, to where Jesus wants you to be. At some point in the journey, you will realize you didn't count the cost, and you will believe it's too high a price for you to pay. And you will choose something or someone over Jesus. If you choose to follow Jesus instead, however, if you allow every relationship and every purchase and every aspect of your life to be formed by the way you follow Jesus first and live the life that he wants you to live, it will lead you to a life that is more abundant and free. You will be more content and at peace, and you will find greater purpose and a deeper meaning in life. I read this week that the way that Jesus uses the word hate in this passage has at its root the idea of cutting, as in cutting it out or cutting the cord and letting go. It's like a parent that cuts the cord so that their children can become who they were meant to be. Or like someone who is finally able to cut the ropes, the bonds that have bound them and have constricted them for way too long. Or when a line from a boat has gotten hung up somewhere and you can't move forward and follow the wind, and the only thing you can do is cut the line so it can be set free. Jesus says whatever is holding you back from following him and shaping your life around him, you need to be prepared to cut it loose so that you can be set free. On the other hand, the things that are truly supposed to be in your life, the people and the relationships that are truly good for you, will never make you choose. True family, whether through blood or marriage, friendship, community of faith, or whatever, will celebrate your faith and your journey with you. They will support you as you try to grow closer to Jesus. They will work with you so that your relationship is based on your mutual love of Jesus. And when you become to that proverbial fork in the road, and you hear Jesus calling you to leave something and go on to something else, they will love you and support you through it. And they will ask how they can walk with you. Or they will recognize that they can't go with you because that isn't where Jesus is calling them to go. And they will be willing to let you go so that you can both be who Jesus is calling you to be. That's what you need to hold on to. That is what will help you finish the journey with Jesus. 2 Saturday nights ago, my wife and I woke up at about 1 o'clock in the morning. We could hear a very strange sound, and we couldn't figure out what it was or where it was coming from. It was loud. It seemed almost like it was pulsing, almost rhythmic. At first, we couldn't tell if it was coming inside the house or outside. Was it one of the children stomping on the floor or banging on the wall? We finally figured out that it was coming from the outside, but it was such a strange sound that we couldn't tell if it was a rushing wind or a loud truck or maybe a street sweeper driving by at a strange moment in the night or maybe even some kind of distant gunfire. I got out of bed. I went to look out the front door, and that's when I saw it. Through the houses and trees, I could see flames coming from the back of a house just one street over. Apparently, a grill had caught fire, threatening the house and everything and everyone in it and around it. I told my wife what I saw. I threw on my shoes as fast as I could. I grabbed my phone, and I actually ended up meeting a neighbor as we were both running down the street to see what was needed. Thankfully, the fire department had already been called and made it to the house before we ever did. Even more thankfully, everyone in the house was fine. The damage seemed to be contained mostly to the back deck and maybe a little bit of the back of the house. Now, a moment like that, even if it doesn't happen to you directly, naturally makes you think, what would I do if it were my house? What would I try to take with me? I suppose you never really know what you would do until you are actually in that moment. But as my wife and I were lying back down in bed and we were pondering it, as we were trying to let our blood pressure go back down and go back to sleep, the answer seemed almost automatically clear to us. Get the kids and each one of us out of the house. Make sure everyone is safe and call the fire department. And that's it. Don't go back in and try to grab photo albums or Bibles or prized possessions or anything else. None of it actually matters that much. It may not all be replaceable, but none of it matters. What matters is the relationships built on true, deep, God-centered love that help us follow Jesus. What is it in your life that is helping you know Jesus more clearly, love Jesus more dearly, and follow Jesus more nearly each day? What is it that is holding you back from that goal? Sometimes the choice is clear and sometimes it isn't, but when you realize what is holding you back, cut it loose. Choose Jesus and journey on. Amen.